The stillness of Oak Ridge in early morning carried a kind of grace, one that wrapped around every mailbox and picket fence like a whispered promise. The sun filtered softly through the trees lining the quiet suburban street. Birds called out. From a distance, nothing seemed out of place. Officer Dean Rourke sat behind the wheel of his cruiser, sipping lukewarm coffee, the kind that lingered too long in the thermos, but still did its job. Parked at the curb, he kept an easy eye on the neighborhood while Onyx, his canine partner, sat alert in the back seat, head high and ears twitching at every passing sound. They weren't expecting trouble. Oak Ridge rarely gave any. Hold on a moment before we move forward. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. And if you're loving these stories, don't forget to hit subscribe. Tomorrow's episode is going to be absolutely mind-blowing. Dean's patrol today was routine, a check-in with Dr. Sienna Hale, a child protection specialist who'd flagged concerns about a house at the end of the block. She hadn't said much on the phone, just enough to get Dean thinking. Something doesn't feel right with that foster placement, she'd said, and Sienna wasn't the type to say that lightly. The cruiser pulled up in front of her house, a small colonial with blue shutters and wind chimes dancing in the breeze. Sienna stood on the porch, arms crossed, her posture calm, but her eyes tired. She waved Dean up the steps with a tight nod. "They moved a baby in last week," she said without preamble. "No formal transfer paperwork, no medical follow-up, no updated case notes in the system." Dean furrowed his brow. "But they filed placement approval?" "They filed something," she replied. "But it's inconsistent, and the neighbors say they haven't seen a social worker come by once." Dean looked past her, toward the modest two-story house at the end of the block. Neatly trimmed hedges, a flag on the porch, nothing outwardly suspicious. But something in his chest tugged as Onyx gave a sharp, restless grunt from the cruiser. Sienna was about to say more when the leash slipped from Dean's hand. Onyx took off like a shot, bolting past them, his body tense and locked into instinct. Dean shouted his name, but the dog didn't stop. He was headed for the backyard of the foster home. Dean broke into a sprint, heart slamming against his ribs. Sienna followed behind him, kicking off her heels on the grass. By the time they rounded the side of the house, Onyx was already there, growling low and guttural, his body coiled beside a patch of grass. And there, barely visible at first, lay a baby, a child no older than a year, wrapped in a light blanket, her tiny body trembling, silent tears streaking her face. Onyx stood over her, rigid, guarding, eyes locked on something unseen. Dean fell to his knees, checking the child with shaking hands. No visible wounds, no bruises, no fever, just cold fear radiating off her skin like static. Sienna crouched beside him, her hand hovering above the baby but not quite touching. "What was she doing out here?" she whispered. Dean didn't answer. He couldn't, because at that moment he realized something far more chilling than neglect was at play. This child wasn't crying for attention. She was frozen with terror, and Onyx, never one to break protocol or bolt from command, had sensed it before either of them did. Dean glanced toward the quiet house, its curtains still drawn, the morning sun casting long shadows over its porch. Whatever waited inside, they were about to find out it hadn't counted on a dog like Onyx, and it hadn't counted on a town like Oak Ridge being awake. Dean didn't remember drawing his weapon, only that it was in his hand when he stepped into the backyard. Onyx had positioned himself between the baby and a woman now frozen in place near the garden shed, her back straight, one hand extended, the other holding a document. Her blouse was crisp, her heels too clean for the muddy grass. She wore a smile that tried to project calm, but her eyes couldn't hide the calculation behind them. "I'm her aunt," she said, like the words were a shield. "This is just a misunderstanding. I came to take her for a court-ordered visit." Onyx didn't believe her. His jaws were locked around the fabric of her sleeve, not breaking skin but not letting go. The tension in his body screamed restraint held by the thinnest thread. One growl away from escalation, Dean moved carefully. who sat with her feet up on the railing, a book open but forgotten on her lap. Her eyes were on the water, where Marissa was throwing small sticks into the shallows, laughing as Onyx retrieved them one by one. She was 4 now, taller, steadier, on her feet. Still didn't talk much to strangers, but with Onyx she talked enough. She spoke to him in full sentences, told him her secrets, whispered stories as she buried her face in his fur. Dean sat down beside Sienna, watching them. "You think he knows this is the last one?" Sienna smiled. He always knew. The news had slowed. The coverage had shifted. Other stories took the spotlight. Elections, disasters, noise. But the work never stopped. The Onyx Foundation now had 3 regional offices, hundreds of cases reviewed, dozens reopened, children found. Some returned home, others not, but all of them seen. That was the difference. Dean reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "They sent this yesterday, said it got delayed in D.C. Sienna opened it. Inside, a gold badge. The inscription was simple: Onyx, K9 Unit 170, for service beyond instinct. She ran a thumb over the lettering, eyes glinting in the sun. "Are we going to tell her?" Dean asked. "About what?" "That there was a time she almost didn't make it." Sienna shook her head slowly. "No, she doesn't need to carry that. She'll grow up knowing she was worth fighting for. That's enough." Down at the water's edge, Onyx dropped a stick and nudged it toward Marissa's feet. She picked it up, held it in both hands like a prize, then ran toward the dock, laughing so hard she stumbled. Onyx was beside her before she hit the ground. He didn't bark, didn't panic. He just stood over her as she pushed herself up, brushed sand off her knees, and hugged him around the neck. Dean sipped his coffee. "He's not going to be around forever." Sienna nodded. "But she'll remember. That part never leaves." When the sun dipped lower, they all walked back toward the cabin, Marissa on Dean's shoulders, Onyx trotting beside them with the easy gait of a dog who had done his duty and earned his rest. Inside, the fireplace glowed. A dinner simmered on the stove. Marissa sat at the table with crayons. Sienna beside her, sketching the outlines of a house that looked very much like the one they now lived in. Dean knelt beside Onyx's bed, rubbing his ears. "You changed everything, you know." The dog blinked slowly, then rested his head on his paws. Sienna came over and knelt too. "You didn't save just her," she whispered. "You saved us all." The night came softly, and for the first time in a long time, there was no fear in the dark. Just peace, just breath, just the quiet. Rhythm of a girl and her dog, resting in the place they'd fought so hard to call home. Not as an officer, but as a witness. And when it was over, they let Onyx sit in front of the podium, Marissa holding his collar with one hand, the other raised to the cameras. It was that photo that went viral. Girl and dog, protector and survivor. Within days, schools started requesting assemblies. Shelters asked for pamphlets. Hospitals called for protocols. Onyx's Law, a proposed federal bill aimed at strengthening oversight in emergency removals, began circulating in committee. Sienna read it twice, then a third time. "It's real," she whispered. Dean nodded. "So is she." He looked over at Marissa, now asleep beside Onyx, her mouth open, a crayon still in her fist. For the first time, she hadn't woken up crying. For the first time, they weren't hiding. Outside, the mailbox overflowed with letters, notes from families, photos from parents reunited with their children, some from people they didn't even know. And beneath it all, Onyx remained what he had always been, a dog who saw what no one else did, and who held on long enough for the rest of the world to catch up. It started like any other morning, coffee percolating in the kitchen, the gentle scrape of cereal bowls, the soft rhythm of a house that had finally learned how to breathe again. Marissa sat at the table in her favorite pajamas, humming tunelessly as she stacked her breakfast into careful towers. Onyx lay stretched under her chair, chin flat, ears occasionally flicking at the sound of spoons and laughter. But today was different. Dean straightened his tie in the hallway mirror, something he hadn't done since his academy graduation. Sienna wore a navy dress, simple and neat, her hair tied back in a way that still caught Dean's eye, even after everything. On the fridge, a white envelope held the invitation, Capitol Lawn, unveiling ceremony in honor of service. The car ride was quiet, but not somber, just calm. Marissa stared out the window, her thumb resting gently against Onyx's collar. When they reached the Capitol steps, the plaza was already filled with people, families, veterans, officers, caseworkers, and children holding hand-painted signs. A brass band played low in the background. At the center of it all stood a cloth-covered statue, surrounded by velvet rope. Agent Corwin greeted them at the edge of the crowd. He didn't speak like a federal official today. He just smiled and knelt to greet Marissa, who offered him one of her cereal towers from a napkin in her pocket. "You did good," he said softly to Sienna and Dean. "All of you." Sienna nodded. "We didn't do it alone. The ceremony was brief, clean speeches, careful words. One senator called it a reminder of accountability. Another called it a moment of reckoning, but none of that mattered until the cloth dropped. The statue was life-sized, cast in bronze, Onyx mid-stride, chest forward, mouth open in motion. At his side, frozen in sculpture, was Marissa, reaching one tiny hand toward him, her expression neither scared nor confused, but trusting. There was a hush, then a single, small clap, then another, until the crowd broke into applause, not the kind that shouts or echoes, but the kind that settles deep, the kind that says thank you without needing to say it aloud. Dean bent to one knee, resting his hand on Onyx's back. "That's you, bud." Onyx blinked once and leaned into the touch. Marissa let go of Sienna's hand and toddled forward, stepping beyond the rope. No one stopped her. She walked right up to the base of the statue, wrapped her arms around the dog's front leg, and held it like she'd done 100 times before, and everyone watched in silence. Sienna wiped a tear from her cheek. Dean stood beside her, his voice a whisper. "She knows." Sienna nodded. She remembers. That night, back at home, the statue appeared on the news again. Marissa didn't notice. She was curled against Onyx on the couch, asleep before the final segment aired. Dean muted the TV. In a world that had once tried to forget children like her, they had given her something permanent, a name that would never be erased, a story no one could seal, and a dog who never let go. The cabin sat at the edge of Lake Keswick, its porch wrapped in sunlight, its windows open to the sound of breeze and birdsong. It wasn't large, wasn't new, but it was quiet. That was all they needed now. Quiet and time. Dean carried 2 mugs of coffee outside and set one beside Sienna. "They all say the same thing," Sienna muttered. "They thought the removals were legal, emergency-based, rubber-stamped for safety." Dean shook his head. "They knew. Maybe not everything, but they knew enough to ask questions, and chose not to," she said. The next confession came from a court liaison. She was tired, middle-aged, her voice hoarse from chain smoking. She testified on camera, eyes blurred with tears. "They told me the kids were being placed with a family. I never thought to ask where or how many." Her notes confirmed more than 24 falsified case reviews. Notes copied and pasted, children assigned new names before the old ones had even cleared the system. Then came the footage, backlog, interviews from a closed foster home 3 towns over. 1 room, 6 children, no records. The woman who ran it had once been certified, then flagged, then somehow recertified under a different name. "They moved them through the same houses," Sienna whispered, "over and over, until the paperwork got up. Some were found, thin, shaken, alive, others were not." Dean didn't speak for a long time after reading the report on a toddler who died during an unauthorized transfer. The child's file had been edited post-mortem to reflect a fictional adoption. No family ever came forward. No grave had a name. They made her vanish twice, he said quietly. Once in life, then again in death. News outlets grew louder. Questions grew sharper. Why hadn't anyone noticed the pattern? Why had no one stopped it sooner? The answer, Sienna realized, wasn't conspiracy. It was comfort. Too many people found it easier not to see. But now the silence was broken. More names emerged. Agents who had pushed back. Nurses who had been fired for refusing to falsify injury. Reports. One social worker who'd quit after she found a child in the wrong house and was told to reassign the narrative. The federal task force expanded. Files poured in from surrounding states. And amid it all, Marissa laughed. Sienna turned. At the sound, caught off guard. The little girl was sitting on the floor, a crayon in each hand, coloring with chaotic joy. Onyx lay beside her, tail gently thumping. Dean smiled faintly. That's new. She didn't speak when we found her, Sienna said. Barely made a sound. And now? Sienna bent down, brushing a lock of hair from Marissa's forehead. She knows we hear her. The papers arrived in a single envelope. Nothing flashy, no fanfare. Just a simple letter from the Department of Justice, confirming the creation of the Onyx Foundation. Dean held it in one hand, sunlight catching the ink just enough to make it feel official. Sienna stood beside him, reading it over his shoulder, the weight of months lifting slowly from her chest. The foundation was more than just a name. It was a message, a permanent public acknowledgement that something had gone terribly wrong, and that it wouldn't be allowed to happen again. It would act as a civilian watchdog, a clearinghouse for foster care cases flagged as suspicious, a whistleblower shelter, and a legal defense arm for parents falsely accused, all under one roof. All born from one moment when a dog refused to let go. Onyx, as if aware of his legacy, sat beside Marissa on the floor of the living room, one paw gently draped over her tiny foot. She giggled as she scribbled with a marker, not on paper, but on his tail. He didn't flinch, just blinked. Sam was there too, typing with one hand and holding a juice pouch with the other. He'd been nominated as head of digital security for the foundation, which mostly meant building encrypted networks and swearing at printers. This site gets more traffic than I thought it would, he said. Submissions are pouring in. We've already flagged 5 potential fraud cases, 2 of them from California. Sienna looked up. Same patterns, same judge names, same fake clinics, same timing. This thing wasn't local. It was just tested here first. Dean placed the envelope on the mantel. Not anymore. Across town, a team of lawyers met in the newly secured office of the foundation. Half were volunteers, others survivors of the system. Caseworkers, ex-judges, even a few retired cops. One of them wore a shirt that read, "Ask me how many names I've recovered." Later that week, they held a press event, not to make noise, but to offer transparency. Sienna spoke, first calm and clear, backed by stories. Dean stood beside her. No more loopholes, no more temporary anything. Sienna held Marissa tighter. She's safe, she's yours, Dean said. That night, Sienna tucked her in under a soft blue quilt. Onyx climbed up beside the crib and curled into a tight crescent. Marissa reached one tiny hand out and rested it on his fur. Sienna turned off the lamp and stood quietly in the doorway. She's sleeping through the night now, she whispered. Dean nodded from the hallway. So are you. She smiled faintly. Maybe not yet, but I will. The world outside still spun, still threatened. But for tonight, in a quiet room watched over by a dog who had never once abandoned his post, healing had begun, and for the first time since it all started, no one was reaching for the light switch in fear. The news broke quietly at first, just a local headline buried on a website no one read. Then another story followed, then a third. Within a week, every major outlet had picked it up. A federal judge under investigation, dozens of missing children linked to sealed court removals, a whistleblower nurse, a decorated canine dog who refused to let go of a baby that others had overlooked. Dean watched the broadcast from the back of the precinct conference room, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. Onyx lay beside him, unmoved by the flurry of voices on the screen. Sienna stood just outside the camera frame, watching from a monitor set up in the hallway, her fingers tapping anxiously against her coffee cup. "They're calling it the Oak Ridge conspiracy," said the anchor, "but sources inside the investigation say the network may span multiple states." Photos flashed across the screen. Judge Malcolm Briarwood, his face pale and tight-jawed in a booking photo. Bradley Hennings being led out of his office in handcuffs. Surveillance stills of the unnamed woman who injected a sedative into a toddler's foot, now listed as a fugitive. Then came the footage. Onyx on the courthouse steps, standing tall beside Marissa's stroller. A crowd had gathered that day, parents, caseworkers, even veterans. When the camera zoomed in on the child, safe and alert, one small hand gripping the dog's ear, the country saw something it didn't expect to see. Hope. Sienna stepped forward that day and spoke not as a consultant or investigator, but as a mother. "This was never just about one child," she said. "This was about what happens when silence becomes system, when checks and balances are turned into smoke and mirrors. This isn't over, but it's begun." Overnight, calls flooded in. Former caseworkers who'd been fired for asking too many questions, families who lost children without explanation, volunteers and lawyers offering help, communities who wanted to know how to protect their own. Dean walked into the kitchen that evening and found 3 voicemails waiting, 2 from national news outlets and 1 from a state senator. Sienna sat at the table with Marissa asleep in her arms. "I'm not ready to be on television," she said softly. "You already are," Dean replied. The next day they testified before a congressional subcommittee. The room was cold, professional, cameras lining the back wall. But the moment Sienna spoke about the needle in Marissa's foot, about the broken ribs, the sealed charts, the silence in the room grew thick enough to drown in. Dean followed with blunt clarity. The system didn't just fail, it protected. The abusers. Onyx sat between them, unmoving. When the session ended, reporters flooded the steps. Children held signs that read, "Protect us, not paperwork." A crowd burst into spontaneous applause. But Sienna didn't smile. She looked into the cameras and said what no one else would: "This will happen again, unless you fix it." And from living rooms across the country, people finally understood. This wasn't a story about a dog or a baby. It was about what people choose to see and what they pretend not to. The first name to flip was a clerk from Family Services, a man who had once signed removal notices without reading them. When the subpoenas arrived, he caved. Within a day, his deposition revealed a chain of names: supervisors, analysts, 2 assistant district attorneys. All of them had touched the paperwork. All of them had looked the other way. Sienna read the transcripts with her jaw clenched. Dean stood at the counter, arms crossed, skimming each page like he was memorizing them. Onyx sat at the door, back straight, eyes never leaving the hallway. All routed through the same courtroom. Dean spoke for the first time. "Briarwood." Lila nodded. "He doesn't act alone. There's a chain. Court clerks, placement officers. Some don't even know what they're part of, but a few do. And they sign anyway." Sienna's hands tightened around the flash drive. "Why now?" Lila looked away. "Because there was a little girl. She came in last week, 3 years old, said her new mommy made her sleep in a closet. When I asked where she came from, she said she had 2 names. She didn't know which one was real." Onyx whined quietly, the sound sharp in the silence. Lila swallowed hard. "I took a picture of her. I wasn't supposed to. But when I tried to find her the next day, she was gone. File sealed, name changed, disappeared." Dean stepped forward. "That photo. Do you have it?" Lila nodded. "It's on the drive, along with dozens more. Kids flagged as high risk. Removed overnight. Paperwork rubber stamped. Sienna didn't move, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you understand what you've just done?" Lila looked at her. "Yes, and I don't care anymore." Dean pulled a folded sheet from his jacket. A warrant request, already prepped, already formatted. "We can use this. We take it to federal investigators, not state, not local, people who can't be bought." "They'll come after you," Lila warned. Dean nodded. "They already have." Sienna reached into her coat and handed Lila an old ID badge, her own, now invalid. "This gets you through the back entrance of the courthouse in Fairfax. Third floor. Ask for Agent Corwin. Use my name. Tell him the system's bleeding." Lila took the badge. "What do I say if he asks why I came?" "Tell him," Sienna said, her voice steadier now, "that a nurse finally remembered what humanity looks like." Later that night, back at their hideout, Marissa slept soundly. Onyx lay beside her, no longer tense but watchful. Sienna sat cross-legged on the floor, scrolling through the drive. Image after image, name after name, proof after proof. Dean stood at the window, phone pressed to his ear. "Corwin," he said, "we're coming in, and we're not coming alone." The hearing room was smaller than anyone expected. The wood-paneled walls were clean but plain, and the seal of the federal judiciary hung silently behind the judge's bench. There were no reporters, no cameras, just a quiet, simmering tension that clung to every seat in the room like humidity before a storm. Sienna sat beside Dean, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Across from them, Agent Corwin leaned forward, organizing the stack of evidence they had delivered. Photos, emails, medical records, voice recordings, surveillance video. Everything meticulously verified. Everything damning. Marissa wasn't in the room. She was across town in a secure facility, protected by agents Sienna had insisted be handpicked by Corwin himself. Onyx had been granted special clearance to stay. With her, his presence documented in an official memo that said nothing of the child's trauma, only that the dog provided regulated therapeutic response. The judge reviewed the files slowly. Then he spoke one sentence. "We are opening a formal investigation into the juvenile placements presided over by Judge Malcolm Briarwood and the Department of Family Services." No one clapped, no one cheered, but the air shifted. Outside, the sky was clear. Dean stepped onto the courthouse steps with Sienna and looked across the plaza. A small crowd had gathered. Not journalists, parents, former foster families, social workers who had been silenced or dismissed. They hadn't been invited, they had simply heard, and now they waited. Sienna turned to Dean. "It's starting," he nodded, "and it's not stopping." Back at the safe house, Marissa played. With a stuffed lion, her cheeks had color. She smiled without flinching. When Sienna stepped inside, she raised her arms and reached for her without hesitation. That was new, that was everything. Onyx followed her, flopping down by the crib with a long exhale. For the first time in weeks, he seemed calm, not because the danger was gone, but because the little girl he'd refused to let go was still alive. Still here, Dean entered behind them, carrying an official letter from the bureau. "It's done. Sienna, you've been cleared for full guardianship." Sienna's breath caught. She knelt down, holding Marissa close. Dean set the papers on the table. "You're officially her legal parent." Dean looked in the mirror, where Onyx now sat alert. They don't know they're already sold, and for the first time they had everything they needed to tear it all down. The court order arrived at 8:07 a.m. sharp, hand-delivered by a man in a navy suit who refused to give his name. Sienna took the envelope without a word, eyes already scanning the seal. Dean stood behind her, jaw locked. Onyx paced along the edge of the porch, sensing the shift in tension. Inside the envelope was a single-page emergency injunction, effective immediately. Sienna Hale's license to consult on state family matters was revoked. Any further engagement would be treated as obstruction. Below the seal, in that unmistakable ink-stroke scrawl, was the signature, Malcolm Briarwood. Dean took the paper and read it twice, then looked up. "They're coming for you." Sienna didn't blink. "They already came." This is just the paper trail. His phone buzzed. An alert from internal systems. Suspension notice. His credentials, locked out of every departmental network. I'm out too, he said. Sienna exhaled. He's cutting us off at the knees. Then came the third strike. A knock at the door, followed by 3 agents on the front steps. This time, they had a court order to seize Onyx. On what grounds? Dean demanded, standing between them. And the doorway. Non-compliance with a protective custody order, the lead agent replied flatly. The child in your home is not in your legal care, and the animal is impeding a court matter. Onyx stood at Dean's side, growling low, muscles tight. You're not taking him, Dean said. The agent's hand dropped to her belt. Dean's did too. Nobody moved. Sienna appeared behind them, holding Marissa, wrapped tightly in a quilt. He's not a dog. He's the only reason this child is still alive. You can protest in court, the agent replied. Now step aside. But Dean didn't. Instead, he spoke quietly into his radio. 30 seconds later, the security feed went black. The front porch empty, the house dark. When the agent stepped inside, it was silent. No sign of Dean, Sienna, or Onyx. They had vanished. 3 hours later, across town, a white van rolled to a stop behind a run-down storage facility. Dean stepped. Out carrying supplies, Sienna followed, with Marissa asleep against her chest. Onyx exited last, ears high, tail stiff. They'll track the car, Sienna said. Dean nodded. Let them. He dumped a cell phone into the drain pipe and handed Sienna a burner. We have 24 hours before they start tightening. Sienna placed Marissa down in a travel crib. She's getting stronger, she whispered. She laughed today. Dean stood at the window. They tried to take her again, and now they're desperate. That night, the real hit came. 2 unmarked SUVs rolled up to Dean's now empty house just after midnight. They didn't knock. They didn't ask. They broke down the door. Inside, the nursery was staged. Crib overturned, drawers emptied, Onyx's leash left hanging like a ghost limb on the wall. No child. No officer, no dog, but on the crib mattress, tucked beneath the blanket, was a printed photo. Sienna, Dean, Onyx, and Marissa in his arms. On the back, one handwritten sentence, "Not today." The nurse called herself Lila. She didn't give a last name, and she didn't show up in any database Sienna searched. But she came to them at night, alone, her hair pulled into a tight braid, her hospital badge hidden in her purse like contraband. They met in an abandoned school gym, one of the last safe places Dean could trust. The lights were off. Only the moon through broken windows gave shape to their silhouettes. Onyx stayed close, standing between Sienna and the door, tail down, his eyes locked on the stranger who hadn't flinched once under his gaze. "I've seen what they're doing," Lila said. "I was told they were going to good homes, private placements, high-need cases. I believed it." Sienna stepped closer. "What changed?" Lila's voice cracked. "I saw the photos." Dean said nothing. He didn't ask what kind. He didn't need to. Lila reached into her coat and handed over a flash drive. "That has the backups, real medical files, before they were purged, before they were altered." Sienna took it carefully, as though holding something sacred. "There's more," Lila said. "I started logging names, transfers, orders filed too quickly, CPS agents who were never seen again after certain removals. All connected. Donation, of course." He nodded slowly, masking the rage that boiled beneath his skin. "No interviews?" She laughed. "Not the kind that matters. You're not dealing with the state here. You're dealing with us." Back in the van, Sam whispered, "Got her. She just admitted to interstate child sales." "Keep it rolling," Sienna said. Dean leaned forward slightly. "Where do they come from?" "Emergency removals," she said. "You'd be surprised how many kids just fall through the cracks. Drugs, neglect, mental illness. There's always a reason to pull them out. We just help them land on their feet." "And the parents," the woman shrugged. "By the time they figure out what happened, the kids are already gone. Courts handle the rest." Outside the print shop, Onyx stirred in the cruiser. His nose touched the glass. A growl, faint and low, built in his throat. Dean stood. "I'll need to think it over." "No problem," she said, sliding a card across the desk. "Just call when you're ready, but if you wait too long, someone else might get her." He took the card, nodded once and walked out. The door shut softly behind him. Down the block, Sienna pressed a button. "We got her. We got all of it." Dean slid into the driver's seat. Onyx climbed over the console and rested his chin on Dean's lap. He didn't bark, didn't move. He had felt it. "She called them cracks," Dean muttered. "Said the kids fall through." Sienna's voice came through the radio. "They don't fall, Dean." He looked at Onyx, who blinked slowly, as if agreeing. "They're pushed." And now they finally had proof of it. Sienna adjusted the scarf around her neck as she stepped out of the sedan, hand in hand with Sam Willoughby, who wore a collared shirt for the first time in a decade. They looked every bit the picture of a hopeful, well-heeled couple, tired of bureaucracy, eager to skip the line. That's exactly what they needed to be. The agency sat in a brownstone, tucked between a yoga studio and an upscale gelato shop. No signs, no sidewalk advertising. Inside, the reception area was quiet and warm, soft music playing. A woman with manicured nails greeted them with the kind of smile that rarely meant sincerity. "You're the Walkers?" she asked. "Yes," Sienna said smoothly. "We were told someone would be available today." "Of course, you're on the list." They were led into a side room, carpeted, cozy, with framed photos on the walls, smiling families, happy toddlers. None of them looked like Marissa, or like any of the 24 vanished children they'd found. The agent, a man named Roland with too much cologne and not enough empathy, slid a folder across the table. "She's healthy. Full term. Parents surrendered custody within hours of birth. No inquiries from extended family. Medical cleared." Sienna kept her expression neutral. "And the fee?" "$65, Roland said, matter of fact. "That includes the legal fees, medical filing and processing. You'll never be contacted." "It's like she never existed before you." Sam leaned forward, channeling all the anger in his chest into a fake smile. "What's her name?" Roland raised an eyebrow. "That's up to you." Sienna's hands tightened in her lap. Roland flipped through more pages. "There's another arriving next month. We move fast. Sometimes we know before the state does." Outside, in the surveillance van, Dean sat next to an audio tech listening. Every word punched harder than the last. Onyx was curled beside his boots, head on paws, eyes wide. Sienna's voice came through the mic again. "How do you guarantee discretion?" Roland gave a knowing smile. "We know the right people, and we know when to keep the state out of things." Dean closed his eyes. There it was, the open admission. They weren't just trafficking in lives, they were boasting about the pipeline. In the room, Sienna nodded slowly. "We'll need time, but we're interested." "Good," Roland said. "You'll hear from us in 48 hours. The meeting ended without a handshake. Outside, Sam practically tore the mic wire from under his collar. "I want to put my fist through his face," he muttered. Sienna didn't respond. She walked straight to Dean's cruiser and slid into the passenger seat. Her hands were shaking. Dean passed her a bottle of water. "You okay?" "No," she said, "but now we have it. Proof, process, price, all of it." Dean started the engine. "How long before we move?" "Not long," she said. "They think we're buying." "And all placements handled through one central contact, someone in family services, name redacted in every document. You think it's Hennings?" "I think he's part of it," she said, "but he's not the architect. This goes higher. He's just the one who cleans the paperwork." Dean picked up one of the case folders, flipping through. The child in the file was 6, removed from a single mother during a wellness visit. Claimed neglect, no photographs, no evidence. Gone within 48 hours. "This kid ever resurface?" Sienna shook her head. "None of them do." Dean stared at the grainy scan of a photo. A little girl with tangled hair and a gap-toothed smile. "What's the connection?" he asked. "Why these kids?" "They all come from poor families, isolated, Parents with minor records, missed appointments, late bills, unpaid tickets, the kind of stuff that gets flagged in algorithmic risk systems. You know how they decide who to check on first? Dean looked up. It's automated? It started that way, Sienna said, but then someone realized you could exploit the pattern, use the red flags to disappear kids no one would miss. Dean set the folder down. Until now, they both turned as Onyx barked sharply from the hallway. A low warning sound. Dean moved fast, weapon out before he reached the front door. He peered through the glass. A man in a suit stood on the porch, mid-50s, thin, calm. He wasn't holding a badge. Dean stepped outside. You're on private property. The man smiled faintly. We're just checking in. That baby, Marissa. She's supposed to be in state custody. We're here to retrieve her. Do you have a warrant? He didn't answer, just motioned to the black car parked at the curb. Another man sat behind the wheel, engine running. Dean didn't flinch. You come one step closer, and my K9 will not wait for a command. Inside, Onyx growled from the foyer, deep and guttural. The man's expression changed, not fear, just cold understanding. You don't realize what you've stepped into. You think this is about one child? I think you're nervous, Dean said. Which means we're doing something right. The man stepped back slowly. This doesn't end with a headline. It ends with silence. You should think very carefully about how far you want to push this. Dean didn't respond, just stared until the man turned and got into the car. It pulled away without another word. Back inside, Sienna had already started packing. They're escalating, she said. They're done watching. Dean nodded. Then so are we. She handed him a flash drive. Everything I have. We need allies. Dean slipped it into his pocket. You thinking local? I'm thinking media. Federal investigators, whistleblowers, anyone who remembers how to listen. Dean looked at the crib where Marissa now slept, unaware of the storm that raged around her. Onyx lay at her side, eyes never closing. This isn't about custody anymore, Dean said. It's about survival. And if they were going to make it out of this intact, they'd have to bring the whole rotten network into the light. The office was dim, a converted storage room tucked behind an old print shop downtown. It had one desk, 2 chairs, and a single overhead bulb. Dean sat across from a woman in a powder blue blazer, her makeup too perfect, her voice too rehearsed. She didn't know he was wearing a wire. Didn't know that Onyx lay in the back seat of the cruiser outside, ears twitching every time she laughed. Sienna listened in from a van 2 blocks away, headphones tight, fingers poised over the recording panel. Sam was beside her, watching the waveform dance across the laptop screen. You said you were looking for options, the woman said, her voice soft and conspiratorial. Private placement is completely legal. You fill out a few forms, pay a donation, nothing public, nothing messy. Dean leaned back, letting her talk. How private? Sealed birth certificates, fresh paperwork. No history attached, she said, sipping from her coffee. We handle everything. You just show up. Even for newborns, he asked. Especially for newborns, she said with a smile. Those go quick. Outside, Sienna stared at the speaker like it was coated in poison. The woman tapped a folder on the desk. This one's already processed. No family contact. Medical check complete. Clean slate. She'll be ready in 2 weeks. Dean stayed still. Careful. And the price? 50, she said without flinching. This isn't just about her. Dean took it, brows furrowing. What do you mean? She's not the only one. Sienna pulled out a folder she'd begun building, clippings, name matches, vague mentions buried in obscure court filings. Children pulled from homes under emergency orders, then shuffled off-grid. No records, no follow-ups, names that didn't match birth certificates, foster homes closed without cause, families reporting removals under questionable pretenses, never heard from again. Dean looked through the documents, face hardening. It's a pattern. No, Sienna said softly, it's a system, and someone had perfected it. Sam Willoughby sat at his workstation with the lights off, the only illumination coming from his monitor. His fingers flew across the keyboard, each click echoing in the silence of the forensic lab. Dean stood behind him, arms crossed, watching the lines of data cascade across the screen. Sienna was on speakerphone, calling in from her kitchen table, where Marissa slept safely under a mountain of baby blankets and Onyx's ever-watchful eyes. I ran her face through every photo database I could access, Sam muttered. DMV, Social Health Department, even a few that aren't exactly legal to touch. And? Dean asked. She's nobody, Sam replied. Or more accurately, she's everybody. Same woman, 3 different aliases, used in 3 different states. Over 5 years. Always connected to emergency placements, always just outside the system. The names she gave, all trace back to adoption agencies that no longer exist or were shut down under suspicion. Sienna's voice sharpened. What happened to the kids? Sam paused, then turned to face the screen. They vanished. He pulled up a grid. Each row was a child. The columns held bare details. First name, age, state, transfer date. All linked to the same 3 identities the mystery woman had used. No post-adoption records, no schooling, no vaccinations, no death certificates. It's like someone hit delete. Dean leaned closer. You're telling me these kids were erased? I'm telling you someone wanted them untraceable. It's a pattern so clean, it had to be designed that way. Sienna took a breath, slow and unsteady. How many? 24 names, Sam said, that I could find. Dean closed his eyes, and Marissa was next. She was the 25th, Sam said, but she slipped. Sienna spoke softly. Because of Onyx. Dean nodded, jaw clenched. So what happens when they realize they lost her? They already know, Sam said. I traced a ping to the dummy email used for the custody docs. It got triggered when the hospital scanned Marissa's bracelet. Whoever's watching, they know she's alive and awake. Sienna went quiet. Then she said, I need a name, a real one, someone who signs off on this. Sam hesitated, then clicked one final file. A legal stamp flashed across the screen. Emergency removal filed under seal. Signature, Judge Malcolm Briarwood. Dean's face darkened. Of course it is. Every name on this list, Sam continued, was removed under one of his orders. Every child, every ghost. Outside the lab, the wind had picked up. Dean could hear it whistle past the windows, rustling the trees along the courthouse steps. Somewhere nearby, a siren wailed, then fell silent. This isn't just child trafficking, Dean said, voice low. It's state-sanctioned. It's deeper than that, Sienna added. It's systemic. Back at Dean's house, Onyx lifted his head and stared at the door. Inside, Marissa stirred, letting out a soft whimper. Sienna gently stroked her hair. We're not going to let you vanish. Dean looked at the folder again. 24 names, 24 missing children, all legally disappeared. Until now. The maps were spread across Dean's dining table, each corner held down with coffee, mugs, notepads, and Dean's badge. Sienna had been working for hours, hunched over like a wartime analyst, drawing lines, cross-referencing files, stitching together what the courts had worked so hard to bury. Dean moved silently around the house, checking cameras, locking windows, running his routines like a soldier in hostile territory. Outside, the neighborhood still looked peaceful, normal, but inside, the truth was a battlefield. I found 10 other kids, Sienna said quietly. Same pattern, same judge, same sealed removals. Dean walked over and leaned against the table. All under Briarwood? She nodded. The paramedics arrived within 4 minutes. They moved fast, efficiently. The lead EMT, a woman in her 40s with hard eyes, took one look at the baby's color and nodded. We've got her. Dean rode with them to the hospital. Onyx wasn't allowed in the ambulance, so he followed in Dean's cruiser, barking from the passenger seat the whole way. At the ER, Marissa was stabilized, oxygen levels slowly climbing back into range. But as the team examined her, one of the attending physicians stopped suddenly. There's a puncture, he said, holding up her foot. Left arch, Faint bruising around the site, swelling, slight discoloration. Dean stared at it. What is that? The doctor's face paled. It looks like an injection point, but this child hasn't had any recent IVs logged. Sienna burst into the room moments later, out of breath, still in street clothes. She rushed to Marissa's side, then stopped when she saw the doctor's expression. There was no needle mark an hour ago, Dean said. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Sienna said, "Somebody got to her. After the house was locked, after we thought she was safe." Dean clenched his jaw. "How the hell did they get in?" "I don't think they needed to," Sienna said. "I think they were already there." Back at the house, Dean checked every inch of the property. The cameras were intact, doors locked, windows secure, no signs of forced entry. But near the back fence, hidden in the grass, he found something small. A used medical glove. Onyx stood beside him, still shaking, his head low to the ground. Dean picked it up carefully, sealed it in a bag. Then he looked at the house, its windows, glowing faintly against the night. They weren't just being watched, they were already in the fight. Hospitals were supposed to be places of healing, of order. But now, under the sterile lights of the pediatric unit, Sienna moved with the focus of someone violating every rule she'd spent a career defending. Dean had stayed behind to monitor the house. Onyx remained at Marissa's crib like a statue, refusing to leave again, not even for food. They had seen what happened when their backs were turned. Sienna's badge wouldn't get her where she needed to go, so she used a nurse's access card, slipped from a locker she knew wasn't locked. It beeped quietly at the security checkpoint, and the door to the surveillance archive clicked open. Inside, the monitors played silent footage from the past 24 hours. Rows of time-stamped video, cameras labeled PEDS RM4 and hallway S4. She scanned each one. Nothing unusual at first, until 2:37 a.m. There, a figure in pale scrubs entered the room. No name tag. No ID badge. She moved like she belonged. There, head down, purposeful, like 1,000 other medical workers. She approached the crib, paused, then reached into a pocket and withdrew a syringe. Sienna leaned forward, breath catching, as the woman injected something into the baby's foot, so calmly it looked routine. 3 seconds later, she was gone. Sienna froze the frame, zoomed in. The woman's face turned briefly toward the camera, but it was wrong. There was no image match in the hospital system, no logged entry badge, no staff registry. Her face didn't appear on any other floor before or after. She wasn't a nurse. She wasn't anyone. Sienna copied the file to a drive and exited just as a night supervisor walked past. She didn't stop, didn't breathe until she was out the side entrance and in her car. She dialed Dean, her voice tight. "She was there," she said. "She gave the injection." "Who?" "A ghost," Sienna replied. "No records, no entry log, nothing." Dean didn't answer right away. They sent someone to silence a baby, and they almost did it. The silence hung between them. "I'm pulling Marissa from the hospital," Sienna said. "Right now." Dean agreed without hesitation. They couldn't trust the building, not the staff, not the cameras. The safety net they thought existed was a mirage. The hospital, the department, the courts, it had all been infiltrated, or worse, restructured into something unrecognizable. Later that night, back at Dean's house, Sienna stood over Marissa's crib. The baby stirred restlessly, but her skin had more color now, her breathing steadier. Onyx pressed his nose against her blanket, then sat back down without moving an inch. Sienna handed Dean the flash drive. "There's more. I've started cross-referencing names." His eyes, though, gave him away. They never stopped scanning, never softened. "Ms. Hale," he said with a rehearsed smile. "What brings you here so early? I assume you're not here for coffee." Sienna didn't smile back. "You know why. I'm here." Dean remained silent behind her, Onyx at his side, the dog's gaze fixed on Hennings without blinking. "We need full records on Marissa Thompson," Sienna said. Hospital documentation, placement approvals, all court correspondence. Hennings tilted his head. I believe those files are sealed. Sealed by you, she said. With an emergency override that no one signed, his expression didn't change. I don't handle overrides personally. Then who did? I'd be happy to direct your request through proper channels. Dean stepped forward. We're not playing games. We've already confirmed forgery in one of your files and evidence of suppressed abuse reports. You want to talk about channels? We're standing in one, and it's leaking. Henning's smile tightened, just slightly. I think we're done here. We're not, Sienna said. She leaned forward, voice low and sharp. That baby was nearly killed. You buried evidence. And now you want me to pretend this is about paperwork. I want you to consider your position, Henning said evenly. You're a consultant, not an agent, not a prosecutor. Your access here is a courtesy, and it can be revoked. Sienna laughed once. You think this ends with me? I think if you're not careful, your name will disappear right next to that child's, he said. Dean's hand instinctively dropped to Onyx's collar. Let's go, Sienna muttered, pulling her coat tighter. As they turned to leave, Hennings called out, One more thing! That complaint you filed last year, the one about Judge Briarwood's emergency removals, it's gone. Deleted this morning. Dean stopped walking. I didn't say anything about a complaint. Hennings gave a little shrug. Then I suppose I misspoke. Back at Dean's house, the atmosphere shifted from anger to vigilance. Dean double-checked the locks on every door, then installed temporary cameras above the entry points. He set Onyx's bed beside the baby's crib, and Onyx didn't leave it. The baby had begun to respond now, just barely. Her eyes followed movement. She clung to Onyx's fur when she woke up crying. She smiled once, faint and fleeting, when the dog licked her hand. Sienna watched them from across the room. She knows. Dean looked over from the window. Knows what? That something bad wants her back. He didn't answer. He didn't need to, because deep down they both understood. Whatever was coming next wasn't about guardianship, or law, or rights. It was about power, and someone had just realized they were losing it. The house was quiet when it started. Just past 2 a.m., the kind of stillness that usually signaled safety. Dean sat slouched on the living room couch, TV off, the soft hum of the security system the only sound. Onyx lay curled at the foot of the crib in the nursery, unmoving except for the occasional flick of an ear. The baby, Marissa, had finally fallen asleep after hours of whimpering and restless tossing. Sienna had gone home, reluctantly, to rest before an early court appearance. Then Onyx made a sound Dean had never heard from him before. Not a bark, not a growl. It was a cry, a deep rising howl, low and cracked, like something primal had broken loose inside him. Dean was on his feet instantly, weapon drawn, sprinting through the hallway as Onyx's howl rattled the walls. He reached the nursery. A door nearly collapsed against the frame. The baby wasn't moving. Marissa was pale, lips tinged blue. Her limbs lay limp against the blanket, her tiny chest still. Onyx stood rigid beside her crib, eyes wide, whining louder now, nudging her. Softly with his nose, Dean's training kicked in. He lifted her gently and cleared her airway. No obstruction, just no breath. He laid her flat on the floor and started compressions. His fingers dwarfed her ribs, each push measured with unbearable care. Then 2 puffs of air. Then again, and again. Onyx paced beside him, panting fast, his body trembling. It felt like hours. Then her chest jerked, a tiny breath, then a weak, ragged cry, barely a whisper, but it was enough. Dean held her to his chest as he called 911, his voice shaking. Infant respiratory arrest, possible cardiac involvement. We need EMS now. We don't rattle the hive. Dean left the lab with Onyx by his side, his hand resting on the dog's shoulder as they exited into the parking lot. The sun had dropped below the horizon, and the sky was sliding into darkness. From his front pocket, Dean pulled the hospital bracelet Sienna had shown him earlier, the one around the baby's wrist. Marissa, not Maddie. Not Madison, and not forgotten, not anymore. The fluorescent lights of Brookside Memorial flickered like they always did, buzzing faintly as Dean and Sienna stepped through the automatic doors. The night nurse at reception didn't ask questions. When Dean showed his badge, she waved them through with a tired nod, barely looking up from her computer. "This is where she was brought 2 months ago," Sienna said, her voice low. "Supposedly for a fractured clavicle. No imaging, no follow-up, just a discharge with the words, 'minor trauma, parental supervision error.'" Dean nodded, jaw tight. He scanned the hallway as they moved, past the pediatric ward, down into records. The hospital's digital logs had been wiped, but the nurse they were meeting tonight had reached out to Sienna privately. Said she had something. Said it had haunted her for weeks. Her name was Cassie, mid-30s, worn down but sharp-eyed. She met them in the break room, far from the security cameras. A paper folder was clutched tight in her hands. "I shouldn't have this," she said, "but I printed a hard copy before it disappeared." She slid the file onto the table and opened it. Inside was a photocopy of the baby's chart, not the version that made it into the official system. This one had scribbles in the margins, notations, a doctor's initialed comment, then crossed out. Sienna traced her fingers down the sheet. Fractures to ribs, bruising around the mouth, abdominal tenderness, possible signs of internal bleeding. "This isn't a bump on the shoulder," Cassie pointed at the bottom of the report. "That last line, it used to continue. I read it the night she came in. It said, 'Consider inpatient monitoring, possible repeated trauma, notify child protective.' But then it cuts." Dean looked up. "You're saying someone deleted it?" "I'm saying I watched the attending get called out of the room," she said. "He came back 5 minutes later and told us to close the file and discharge the baby. He didn't even look at the new vitals." "Latent frisk?" Dean asked. Cassie nodded. "He wasn't like that at first. Something changed." Sienna closed the folder gently. "And now he doesn't practice." Cassie swallowed hard. "I've been a nurse 10 years. You see patterns. Kids come in, always with the same injuries, different excuses. Usually you make the call, you do what you're supposed to. But that night, they made it disappear. I've seen 3 more cases since then. 2 toddlers, 1 infant, always sealed." Dean leaned forward. "Sealed by who?" Cassie's voice dropped to a whisper. "Court orders, emergency injunctions, all signed by Briarwood." Dean froze. Sienna glanced at him, her breath catching. Cassie nodded toward the hallway. "I've got nothing else. But you should talk to ER nurse Chandra in Arlington. She had one of them too. Same story, same silence." Dean took the folder, tucking it inside his jacket. As he stood, Cassie grabbed his arm gently. "Promise me something," she said. "Promise me that girl isn't going back." Dean's voice was gravel. "She's not." They left the hospital in silence. The sky above the parking lot was clear, stars sharp against the black. Sienna looked down at the bracelet in her pocket. "They're not hiding mistakes, Dean. They're burying evidence." Dean started the car, and whoever's behind this has help on the inside. Behind them, Onyx watched the entrance of the hospital, ears perked. He didn't move until both doors were shut, because something in him understood now. This wasn't a rescue, it was a war. The Department of Family Services building looked like it had been designed to be ignored. Brown brick, no signage, windows that mirrored the sky. It stood squat and silent on the edge of a government complex, flanked by identical boxes housing DMV records and zoning appeals. Dean and Sienna stood in the lobby for 12 minutes before someone came to the window. Bradley Hennings was the kind of man who wore tailored suits to jobs that didn't require them. He had a polished voice, practiced charm, and a handshake that lingered just a second too long. But complied. Sienna took the badge, studied it, then handed it to Dean. He looked at it, then back at the woman. "Where's your ID number?" "I just got this issued," she said. "It hasn't been uploaded yet." Sienna's eyes narrowed. "What office are you from?" "Richmond," she replied too quickly. "There's no Richmond office," Sienna said coldly. "It was consolidated to Ashburn last year. The woman shifted, then reached for the door again. But Onyx moved between her and the handle, growling. Dean didn't stop him. "You're not taking her," Sienna said, her voice sharper now. "Not without central verification," the woman straightened. "If you interfere with a court-ordered transfer, officer, you're risking obstruction charges." Dean looked her dead in the eyes. "You first." The woman turned on her heel, walked briskly to her car and drove off. No protest, no call to her supervisor, no outrage, just gone. Sienna didn't speak for a long time. Then, barely audible, she said, "Dean, we're not dealing with red tape." He nodded. "We're dealing with a system that's being used to disappear kids." And Onyx, still at the door, growled, low again, because even though the car was gone, something was still watching, something that hadn't planned on being seen. The old courthouse in Ashburn was always too quiet after hours. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale glow over the linoleum floors as Dean walked down the corridor with a thick manila envelope under his arm. Onyx padded silently beside him, his nails clicking faintly with each step they passed. Closed doors and flickering exit signs until they reached the last office on the left, forensics. Inside, Sam Willoughby was halfway through a slice of cold pizza when he saw Dean enter. He wiped his hands on his hoodie and grinned. "Well, if it isn't Officer Rourke and his shadow, what kind of mess are you dragging through my door this time?" Dean handed him the envelope. "Fake court documents. Need you to tell me how." "Fake." Sam opened the folder and frowned. He laid the pages out across his desk, adjusting his wireframe glasses. Onyx sat near the door, alert but still, eyes locked on the hallway outside. "Judge Briarwood's signature?" Sam murmured. "I've scanned his real one before. This is a digital paste job. Poor quality too, not even vector-based. Someone grabbed it off a fax or PDF and slapped it on like a stamp." He ran the paper through a scanner and pulled up magnified details on his monitor. "See this pixelation? This corner here's blurred, no pressure variance, no pen stroke depth, no embossing either." "So it's a forgery?" Dean asked. "Not just a forgery, it's a template. Look at the alignment here and here. They've used this format before, multiple times if I had to guess." Dean leaned in. "You can trace it. If they reused metadata or didn't scrub file properties, maybe. Give me a day. Less if I skip sleep and eat more trash." Dean nodded. "Do what you can. Fast." As Sam worked, Dean called Sienna. She was still at the precinct reviewing medical records. Her voice was tight. "I ran the baby's medical ID through the old triage database. She's been admitted to the ER twice. Different hospitals. Both times, unexplained injuries, the kind you document with full reports." "Let me guess," Dean said. "No reports. Nothing. One discharge summary just ends mid-sentence. Like someone yanked the plug on the record itself." "Who was the attending?" Sienna hesitated. "Dr. Leighton Frisk, license suspended 6 months ago. Multiple complaints, never followed up. Disciplinary hearing postponed 3 times, then dismissed." Dean didn't speak. The pattern was becoming clearer by the hour. Back in the forensics lab, Sam had his feet up on the desk, typing rapidly. Bingo, they left digital fingerprints. Whoever made these files used a cracked version of Adobe Acrobat registered under a dummy name. But the email tied to the license, same as the domain on the custody email. He scribbled it down and handed it to Dean. Dean read it, then read it again. This wasn't just someone faking a form. This was a network, a chain of deliberate actions, masked by a paper trail that only looked real from a distance. "Run this email through law enforcement databases," Dean said. "I want to know how many other orders it's attached to." And Sam, quietly, "If they know we're onto them." "I get it," Sam said, already pulling up more screens. Voice steady. "Onyx, heel!" The dog didn't budge. The woman shifted. "He's attacking me." Dean holstered his weapon. "If he was attacking, you wouldn't be standing." The baby didn't cry. She clung to Onyx's fur with both fists, knuckles white. Her tiny frame shivered, not from cold, but from whatever had been imprinted into her body's memory. Sienna arrived breathless and knelt beside the child. She didn't speak, just observed the baby's blank stare, the way her eyes darted toward the woman's voice and then back to Onyx. When Sienna reached gently for her, the child flinched, but only for a moment. She allowed herself to be picked up, but kept one, fist clenched in Onyx's fur until the very last second. "You have papers?" Dean asked, his voice hardening. The woman produced them like a magician's trick, a manila folder filled with custody forms and a printed visitation schedule. 2. Perfect, too fast. Dean had handled real emergency transfers before. They never looked like this. "I got these from CPS this morning," she said. "It's all above board." Dean scanned the documents, then passed them to Sienna. She flipped through quickly, her eyes narrowing. "The child's bracelet says Marissa," she muttered, "but the papers say Madison." The woman didn't flinch. "That's just a clerical error. She was called Maddie before adoption. They probably didn't update the name yet." "Except she's not adopted," Sienna countered, now standing. "This says she's a ward of the state. No adoption. No final placement. No consent from the caseworker of record. And CPS doesn't fax emergency visitation to strangers from a Gmail address." Dean watched the woman carefully. She shifted her weight, but didn't run. That told him she was either confident or she had backup. Then Onyx growled again, a deep, warning rumble that stopped the air itself. Dean placed a firm hand on the leash. "You're not taking her," he said. "Not today." From the house, another voice called out, "Everything okay back there?" Dean turned his head just slightly, enough to glimpse a man stepping out the back door, late 30s, clean-shaven, polo shirt, holding a phone. Not smiling, Sienna stepped back with the baby, her voice soft and urgent. "Dean!" Onyx pressed forward, teeth tightening. Dean's instincts fired at once. This wasn't a custody dispute, it was a setup. And the baby, somehow, was just the beginning. The baby slept lightly in Sienna's arms, her breath shallow and uneven, as if even unconscious her body still braced for fear. Inside Dean's cruiser the silence was heavy. Onyx sat upright, unblinking, his eyes locked on the house they had just left. The so-called aunt had been told to wait inside. Dean had called for backup. It hadn't arrived yet. Sienna flipped through the custody documents again. There was something about them that didn't sit right. Her fingers stopped at a signature line. "This judge," she said, "Malcolm Briarwood. He's real, but this signature isn't." Dean raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "Positive," she said, pulling out her phone. "I've seen Briarwood's handwriting a dozen times. He still uses pen and ink, like he's signing the Constitution. This is a scanned signature, copy-pasted." She held up the screen, showing a sample of a real order. The difference was obvious. "And the email address," she added, pointing to the contact on the form, "is from a generic domain. State emails don't look like that. They're structured, secure." Dean took the documents back, staring at them now like a landmine he'd almost stepped on. "So what are we looking at?" "A fraud," she said. "Someone's fabricating court orders, slipping kids into placements that aren't monitored. I've seen scattered signs before, but never this clean, never this fast." Dean's hand gripped the steering wheel tighter. "This isn't just sloppy paperwork. Someone wanted her out of the system." Sienna glanced at the baby, her small chest rising and falling under the blanket. "No," she said quietly. "Someone wanted her invisible." The cruiser radio crackled to life. "Dispatch, reporting a CPS agent en route." Dean responded quickly and told them to expedite. When the agent arrived, she was a woman in her 50s, well-dressed, clipboard in hand. She moved with efficiency, not warmth. Sienna stepped in front of the car before she could open the rear. "Door, I need to see your badge," Sienna said. The woman blinked as if surprised by the question.